people feel a lot of times like the future feels so uncertain, and there's a lot of ambiguity about what's going to happen in the future. And one of the points I make a lot of times in my keynotes is the future really so uncertain, or is it undecided? I've had that phenomenon, I'm sure you have too, where maybe your boss comes over and slaps down a newspaper clipping on your desk and goes, this is a thing about cloud. What's our cloud strategy, right? And the likes of it, like there's no cloud strategy. There's a strategy, and a cloud may be part of how we deploy that strategy. But we don't have a high level operational cloud strategy. Like, that's a very silly thing to say. And so it's the same thing with automation, with AI, with agentic AI, anything you name. There is no AI strategy for most companies. So in What Matters Next, I break it down into two extremes, right? So there's the extreme of sacrificing the present for the future, and there's the extreme of sacrificing the future for the present. And I think what you're describing is someone who's sacrificing.
Hi there. Welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. In this podcast, I interview successful business leaders and industry experts to help you grow and scale your business. In this episode, I had a discussion with Kate O'Neill, and she's a tech humanist. She is a global authority on AI ethics and human-centric digital transformation. She is advising Fortune 500 leaders. She speaks worldwide on a balancing technology with the human values. She is known for strategic optimism. She guides organizations through AI, LOT, and digital challenges. With over 25 years of expertise, Kate pioneered Netflix's first content management role and Toshiba's Internet. And she's the author of 6 books, including her new book, What Matters Next. She's been shortlisted for Thinker50 Digital Thinking Award and featured on a BBC, Wired, NPR. She's also recognized as a technology entrepreneur and strategist of the year. Kate helped business leaders to understand technology and also impact of technology on our human values and also how to improve our human experience. So this was very interesting discussion. We talked about Kate's new book, What Matters Next, and I will include a link to that book below this video. She also talked about some of the challenges business leaders are up against around technology, and also some of the opportunities from this AI innovations and also other technology innovation. One of the areas I always see business leaders struggle is when it comes to making decisions around technology or IT department. He talks about some of the strategies, some of the step-to-step process, how to approach these decisions, and she also talked about how to understand the impact of the decisions on their teams, customers, and vendors, and how to improve human experience by making these decisions. Hope you find this discussion valuable as much as I did. Don't forget to send us your feedback, subscribe to this channel. Until next time, please welcome Kate O'Neill. Hi guys, welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. Today our guest is someone very special who, understanding human nature, understanding business process. Somebody very expert on these subject. Kate O'Neill. Kate, enjoy reading all your books, and it's it aligned with my industry as well. But I can enjoy the take you have on all those books. I never seen that anywhere before. So congrats to touching the topic of decisions, people, and human centric in your book. So welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for time. I'm looking forward to learning from you.
Thank you, Gurmeet. It's a thrill to be here with you. I know you do such great work. I've been looking into your work as well, and very impressed with your level of thoroughness and what your curiosity that you bring to all of your work. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. So let's talk about how's it going with What Matters Next, the new book. It was just released in January, right?
In January, yeah. And then it became a finalist for the International Book Awards, and it has also it was included in the Thinkers50 Best New Management Book list for 2025. So it's doing well in that respect. It's nice to see it making some lists and some awards. And the most important thing is the feedback from people who are actually using it to make decisions and sort of reevaluating their process for making tech decisions based on what they read in the book. So that's really the most meaningful feedback.
Very interesting. One of the item I enjoy most in your books, Sakir, was whether it's What Matters Next or Future So Bright or Tech Humanist. You tying back to the human experience, human centrics, human behaviors, all those things. Was that something you learned? Was that based on experience, or was it based on a research? Like, what was the thought process behind it when you start relating everything around humans?
Yeah, I think it's just a lifelong fascination with humans. And I learned that so in my career in technology, which has been 30 years or so working in technology, but actually I've been interested in technology since I was a child, probably like you. I'm guessing that you were also a child who liked technology. Is that right, Gurmeet?
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. So we're both fascinating with tech as a kid, but it isn't just the tech that fascinated me. It was the fact that you could use tech to do things that would help you connect better with people, that would help you understand people, that would help you keep up with people. And especially once things started to be connected through the internet, once we started to have the ability to use email and bulletin boards and the web and I'm dating myself by talking about the internet pre-web, but but that's there it is. That's the truth.
Yeah.
And then, once we had social media, the sort of dream of social media being that we could really maintain friendships and close relationships with people despite distance and that of course doesn't include all of the many things that have gone wrong with social media in the years since, but I think that that attraction to technology for what it offers humanity has been just something that's been with me since earliest days, and it's still there. I still kind of every time I see new technology, when I look at like AI agents, for example, and where they're going, all I can think about is how this could potentially make people's lives better. And of course, there are ways it can make people's lives worse too. We need to talk about that. We need to recognize it. But I think the real opportunity is in thinking about both sides in an integrated way. Like, how do we manage those risks while building toward what could actually make life better for people?
hmm and you talk about, one topic is very important. I've never seen anybody touch the way you, decision making in the industry with the business leaders, right? Especially in the book, What Matters Next, you were talking about when you were talking about it, were you looking at only tech startups or early on companies, or were you also looking for established companies? Because I find these are two different way of looking at it. Tech
Yeah.
startups are the tech savvy people, and definitely they need help. Your chapters make perfect sense for them. But did you also take a look at the established company, because they make a decision totally differently?
Yeah, yeah. So I've really had good luck in my career to have worked across a wide range of companies of different sizes, of different maturities, in different industries, in different countries. So I've really gotten a very, sort of comprehensive taste of all of these different types of approaches to technology, to decision making. And you're right, type of decision making can vary from startups to more established companies, but I don't find that any of them are not in need of some guidance or, some kind of
Sure.
methodology for how they make better decisions. And I think it's also true no matter what kind of company you're working in these days. I hear from leaders in all kinds of companies that they all feel like the world is moving really fast, that technology is moving really fast, that it's really hard to keep up with. So even if you're working in a tech startup, it can feel like, oh, we've got pressure to get the new frontier model out tomorrow because our competitors are breathing down our necks. And that acceleration, that feeling of acceleration is affecting all of us. And I think it was just a really important framework to acknowledge that we are all making decisions in the context of increasing tech prevalence and increasing acceleration.
So where do people go wrong when you're making decision? What I've seen, like here in my experiences,
Yeah.
especially established company. I don't work a lot on the new tech startup, but a lot of established company. Uh, people freeze when they have to make a decision, and that's probably one of the items that as soon as they see technology, they have to make a technology related decision. They're not technical people; these are presidents, CEO of the companies, and I've seen a leadership level. Moment they have to make a decision, we just freeze because that's not their expertise in making decision around technology. But I don't think there's an option not to make a decision. So. That's my experience. Where you see that some of the challenges business leaders are up against when they're making decision and technology.
Yeah, so in What Matters Next, I break it down into two extremes, right? So there's the extreme of sacrificing the present for the future, and there's the extreme of sacrificing the future for the present. And I think what you're describing is someone who's sacrificing the future for the present in a sense by not making decisions. There's short-sightedness versus long-termism. This tendency to think like, I'm not ready to make this decision, even if you have all the facts. And the example I give throughout What Matters Next that really feels like it epitomizes that is climate change. So many leaders really understand that this is a real phenomenon. There are real needs that every kind of business needs to be making around sustainability, that every industry needs to be making, and yet we drag our feet. We drag our feet on making the right kinds of decisions. Whereas, as I say in the book several times, there really is no decision that we could make today that would feel rash in 10 years. Like, it's going to all feel like we took too long to make these decisions, right? So I think that's where I see that kind of, parallel to what you're describing when you work with more established company leaders and they, ham and haw and don't know how to make the decision. And I want to be respectful to your listeners because I assume your listeners are also leaders of big companies in many cases. And this isn't to say that no one knows how to make a good decision in those circumstances, but I think what I sense from leaders in many organizations is just that complexity, the sense that it's getting harder because things are moving faster. There's more technology involved, and there are more downstream consequences because of that. Because I know that if I make this decision with AI or I make this decision with automation, then there are orders of magnitude of consequences that I wouldn't have had to deal with in the past when I was making these, less automated kinds of decisions. So I think that
Impact
that
is much bigger. The
yeah, yeah,
impact is much bigger, whether it's positive or negative, but impact is much bigger that it used to be before.
right, right. Because I think with AI and other emerging technologies, what we can recognize is that there's capacity and there's scale like we've never seen before. And that really sort of changes the stakes that are involved with the decisions that people are making. And I don't say that to make it feel harder to make decisions. Say that to recognize why it is that it's so hard for people when they're facing the need to make a decision but recognize, well, I don't want to lay in the wrong technology here. I don't want to like automate the wrong part of this process or, build the wrong data set or use the wrong algorithmic decision making. I also hear a lot from leaders when they're thinking about, AI processes and automating different kinds of parts of their organization that they think, "Oh, I'm afraid to invest in this platform because what if, 3, 6 months from now, it turns out that that's irrelevant and everybody else is moving over there," right? And I think that's a very understandable, dilemma. But
Yep.
what I always tell people in that situation that you'll usually be better off because you have momentum toward change. You've already begun to think about what the processes are that you need to automate. What are the kinds of benefits that your organization stands to gain from putting different kinds of technology in place around the different systems? And what kinds of human oversight do you need around those decisions? So even if the platform changes or the tools and technology change, you're still going to have those conversations within your organization, and you're going to be better off for having had them now.
Yeah, lessons learned don't go away. You still have those lessons learned, which
Right.
what something very important you mentioned, the complexity, Kate. Many years ago, we used to have business strategy, and then we used to have a technology strategy in a company, right? So I think what we've seen over the last few years, they both become the same. Business strategy and technology, there's no difference, right? Because there's so much. You cannot find a business process these days that does not interact with the technology. So improving business process does not make sense without having a technology process improved, right? So they kind of so integrated these days, and that definitely add complexity. And now business leaders, when they're making decision, technology is also part of it. So I think that's where probably bringing a little bit complexity back to the decision making process, because they're so used to making a business decision, not technology decisions.
Yeah, I think you're right on it, Gurmeet. And there's another phenomenon that I think, you're when you're talking about that, you're in some ways alluding to, but it's important to call out, which is that it isn't very common yet to see people rise to the CEO role through the technology roles. Right? That's something that you'll see in technology-centric companies, your Googles, your IBMs, your Microsofts, and those sorts of companies, although not entirely, right? A lot of times it's the operations people or the marketing people or salespeople who rise to the CEO role. But outside of technology-centric companies, when you're looking at banking and finance, when you're looking at health or insurance, when you're looking at operations and logistics, like most of those companies will not see a technology person, IT or CIO type of role or someone who's in systems or data or digital. That person is not going to be the person who rises to the CEO level, which
Hmm.
I think that's going to change. We're on the cusp of seeing that change. But I think that's one of the reasons why we see this disconnect where there still feels like there's executive and strategic and business decisions that need to be made that feel like they're at a different level from what the technology decisions are. Whereas I think we can recognize that that feels a little bit like an arbitrary distinction in many cases. Like those decisions very much need to be wrapped up and wholesale kind of with those business decisions as well.
Got it. Very interesting. You mentioned, and CEOs in not having the tech background. So when and one of the chapters it ties back to in your book is that getting the right data and measuring the data, verifying the data before you make a decision.
Mm.
Where you see some of the challenges that areas that is more important for those CEOs. They're not tech savvy, but they need to make a technology decision. So they need to get the right data. They need to find a way to verify it, measure it, make sure it's the right data before they make a decision. What are your thoughts on that, and how do these people go about?
Yeah, I think it's a great observation and a great call out from what matters next. But I think one of the things that executives often struggle with and leaders in general struggle with is that it is a little bit difficult to think outside of the traditional business school model of, we're thinking about revenue, we're thinking about profit, we know how to read a P&L statement, we know how to, those kinds of things are sort of standard. But where you start to bring into it a little more agility and needing to understand evolving business models and how we can make more agile decisions, there's a level of sophistication with data and with measurement that needs to be developed for many leaders. It's a matter of understanding how to model your company and the meaningful processes within your company in data and know what you're looking at. So I think a lot of times when leaders are looking at sort of reports or dashboards that are being reported up to them, they're not necessarily asking the questions that they need to ask in order to ascertain the most important things about the company. So it's starting from the wrong way. It's like, if what you're doing is as a CEO, you're receiving a dashboard from your analysts who are pushing up to you, what they expect you need to know, that's not being informed by your purposeful, intentional leadership that from the top down says, in order for me to better understand how we're functioning as a company, I need to understand these things. And in fact, we all need to understand these things. So
Mm,
let's, kind of collectively do some work and some evaluation, some self-evaluation to say what is it we would need to understand about ourselves as a company in order to better understand how we're meaningfully fulfilling on what we say our purpose is. If we say our purpose is to help people learn, more independently, like a Duolingo sort of thing, then we need to understand, how effectively people are learning. Duolingo
mm,
just implemented scores on many of their languages, which map to the CEFL language learning scores that you would use in reality if you were migrating to a different country and needed to prove that you had the language skills. So I mean, they're actually looking at externalities and at ways of benchmarking and saying it's not just about the gamification of the platform. We're not only trying to bring people back every day. We know that it needs to matter. It needs to have some tie to what people are actually going to practically do with what they use our business for or offering for. And this is one example. I'm sure that everyone listening has their own examples within their company of the kinds of things that you meaningfully want to do. And the question is, are you measuring the things that you would need to measure in order to make really meaningful assessments about whether you're fulfilling on that purpose?
That is such a great point, Kate. Many years ago, and we were making a not so good decision in a corporate world because we didn't have enough data. There was no means of getting data. These days, we have too much data. And the decision gets sometimes, still simply because we have too much data on every. We can find every aspect of different ways of slice and dice the data. But is that a meaningful data to move business forward, or is that a meaningful data to impact people that are working for you? I think that's such a great point that you need that data, not just any data that could it could jeopardize the decision. I think the focus on the right data, getting the right data to impact people, that's more critical these days than it was ever before.
Yeah, because I think the wrong data can mislead you too. I mean, if you're looking at, think I share an example, and I do share an example in What Matters Next from when I was head of customer experience and product development at magazines.com. And there was an example, an issue that we had with the renewal rate of people renewing a certain magazine subscription. And that magazine subscription was People Magazine. It so happened that we had a very good deal with People Magazine to promote that magazine for first-time subscribers. We could promote it at like $1 for your first year of People. And so it was a loss leader to get people into the system. And then they were supposed to renew, obviously, for their second year at a full rate and beyond. But the fact was we were still pushing that first year rate to people even after they were subscribed, and there was no limit. People could still add second and third year terms to their subscription with that $1 rate and so on. So it was looking like we were getting cancellations on the renewal instead of it looking like we were just doing a bad job of filtering our email list and not pushing that promotion to people who were already subscribed to the magazine. But it took a lot of investigation. It took me and the head of business intelligence and just kind of modeling on a board and pulling a bunch of reports and finally getting to the bottom of it and going like, "Oh, our renewal rate is great. It just doesn't look like it because we're actually cannibalizing our renewal rate into these first term offers." So I think it's that kind of thing where you have to really be determined to find an answer to a question, because those things, like, you could get penalized for thinking at, if you're just looking at your renewal rate, for example, in this example, and saying, "Oh, it's gotten terrible. We must not know what we're doing. We're going to need to, invest a whole bunch of time and resources and training into increasing our renewal rate." Well, that wasn't really the issue at all. We needed to increase our focus on filtering and, segmenting our email campaigns. That I think that kind of thing has many, many parallels in many organizations. There are bound to be things that you're doing in your organization where you're looking at the data and the data seems just like it doesn't make sense. Why is this happening? And it's going to take some commitment to getting to the bottom of something in order to find out why, or in order to elucidate, what could you be doing that would actually improve that situation. But I promise that in the end, it's always worth it to be working with what you know to be insightful and true, as opposed to, merely following what the data that may or may not be the right data is telling you to do. Like, you've got to stay present in the process and make strategic decisions about what you're seeing.
And that goes back to what you tied in a book is asking the right questions, right? You can slightly ask a different question, get a totally different data. So, working on your questions, developing those questions, I think that's a critical for business leaders, because your questions will change the data. Depending on what you ask, and you'll get that data based on your question.
Yeah, yeah, and it's another thing that I say a lot with this work is that people feel a lot of times like the future feels so uncertain, and there's a lot of ambiguity about, what's going to happen in the future. And one of the points I make a lot of times in my keynotes is the future really so uncertain, or is it undecided? And I think that's the thing, that we need to be reminded sometimes about the agency we have to make decisions. Even if those are incremental, small decisions, there's still decisions that shape what the possible outcomes are. And even if we're not able to eliminate all the worst possibilities, we can still make moves toward the future we prefer having. We can still close the gap between what is most likely to happen and what we prefer to have happen. So I think that's the thing that I most like for people to take away from this work, is that those questions that you're talking about, the asking better questions, the purpose of those isn't simply to ask better questions. It isn't just to get to a point where you're, maybe feeling like you're interrogating the business in the right way or that sort of thing. What is the point of that is to be able to look into the future with more clarity and to be able to assess what's likely and what's possible and be able to set yourself up for a better future, be more future ready, as I say a lot throughout the
Mm,
book.
very interesting. So make maybe small incremental changes towards the future instead of the big changes, what you meant. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think that's the thing, is like people get daunted and overwhelmed by how ambiguous the future is. The future has always been ambiguous. It's always been uncertain, but I think it feels more uncertain now because of that rapidity of change, right? The sense that things are accelerating so fast. And so we need better tools. We need better tools for thinking and deciding that actually help us navigate what feels like an accelerating environment, and these are those better tools. Being better able to kind of plot time on this timeline and understand what we can learn from the past, what we know about now, and what foresights we can anticipate about the future. And doing that in a methodical way on a regular basis and making sure we're learning how to do that better and better over time actually sets us up to be more future ready and to bring better futures into our organization and really into the future for everyone, for all of the customers that we're affecting, for all of the communities we're affecting, and everything, the world itself, really.
And now, making decision is not an option, right? Whether you make a good or bad decision, you gotta make a decision. And this took me long to understand, Kate, is n- not making decision is a decision itself.
Ah,
So you gotta make a decision. So just because you're adding a time and not making decision, you're making decision not to make a change.
yeah, exactly. So not a fan of the band Rush, but that is a Rush lyric, so we have to at least give credit.
Yeah. Yeah, because a lot of people understand just we're gonna delay this for 6 months. Yes, sure, but that is a decision you make, and you have to understand that that is your decision.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. And I think that some decisions require that, right? Like some decisions you do actually need more data. You do need more context. You do need to understand better, what are the downstream consequences going to be. We don't have enough information yet, but you need to know, the decision ought to be, how could we get that information? Like, what the decision is, we're going to figure out what information it is we actually need in order to make this decision. And like, let's gather that information. Let's, assign a committee, whatever it takes. But moving us toward greater clarity is the decision we ought to be making in that situation.
Wow. So let's talk about the other important side. I know technology, all these important decisions are important. All of that is very, very critical. But end of the day, it gotta impact the humans that work it. This is the most critical piece. So how do we consider that? How do we make sure that we making decision, whether we improving business process or technology process? End of the day, people move business forward, not a technology. Tools are good. Technology is very good, but what moves everything forward is the humans other side. So we gotta make a decision in that direction. So how do people go about it, and how do they focus on that area?
Yeah, it's funny. Out of all of this fascination with technology all my life, the other fascination that's run right alongside that has been language. I've always been fascinated with language. I am a language nerd. I learn a lot of languages, and have since I was a kid, also. So with that, one of the things that I feel sort of comes along for the ride with being fascinated with languages is an understanding that meaning is there as part of the transaction of the language. If you and I are communicating like this, there's a certain amount of what I say that you understand, what you say that I understand, and where we have that shared understanding is where meaning has been exchanged, right? We've communicated something of meaning between us. Meaning, I think, is an interesting concept anyway, because it is so stratified. Like we think about meaning when we talk about what a meaningful experience is, or making meaningful decisions, or what does it mean to be alive? What is the meaning of life? Even those meanings are all different from one another, and yet they all have in common this sense that they're about what matters. And I find that that is a really important insight into not only human philosophy and what kind of guides us and moves us as people, but also when we think about business strategy, it turns out that the way we can think about meaning in business is as purpose. Purpose is not just this kind of touchy-feely abstract concept that many times, we hear about, like um thinking about purpose-driven companies or that sort of thing. Those kinds of things can often get off into different, sort of different discussions that don't feel very grounded in business strategy.
Mm.
But I think one of the ways to keep it grounded in business strategy is to understand purpose as a very specific articulation of what makes the value proposition meaningful for people. What is it that the company exists to do and is trying to do at scale? And what are the people inside and outside the company looking to accomplish, where there's alignment between, that kind of organizational purpose and the purpose that people have, let's say, outside the company, customers of the company, patients, guests, students,
Mm.
whatever the role that people might be in at that time. I think when we think about purpose that way, or we think about meaning that way, it really allows this lens to open and for us to look much more clearly with much less BS, right? And much less kind of kidding ourselves about what matters in our organizations. We can let things fall away that are not as important. And when we think about employee experience too, that very much has to do with what purpose they serve, what purpose our organization is trying to accomplish, and the purpose people bring by being part of that organization. So there's a way in which this all ties together. And it turns out also that when we bring more AI, more technology, more tools into that sort of strategic operational workflow, that it actually helps to have that purpose defined so that we can make sure that we're being succinct and clear about what we're asking AI to do, what we're asking technology to do. If we can make those delegations and those assignments very crisp and very clear, we can get the best possibility of people working with a sense of agency and fulfillment, that they're contributing to something bigger than themselves, something meaningful to them, something where they feel like they are sharing problems with one another and trying to, kind of collectively trying to knock something down that was an obstacle. People love that. People thrive on that kind of environment. And
Mm.
we're serving the people outside the organization who are looking to us for the thing that they're coming to us for. And technology is helping us do that by being aligned with that purpose that we can identify. So it all makes a great deal of sense when we understand purpose as this kind of organizational principle, as opposed to sort of a fluffy ideal that we're just going to kind of
So
talk about with sort of feel good vibes or whatever at the company retreat, which isn't how we operationalize that.
that is a great point. If you understand the purpose, definitely all the technology you're going to implement, you're going to implement towards the purpose. And the purpose, if you the purpose is to help people, for them to be more productive, or rather, to make their life easier, or improve employee experience or customer experience, at least you any technology you implement, you're not implementing for just for the sake of that there's a new tool, new or shiny tool out there. You're implementing because you wanna better your employee experience or customer experience, or you align that with a purpose. I think that's such a great point. I think that's missed more often than it should have been, but that's what we're
I
thinking.
agree. I mean, I know we both have seen this so much because I think that's what happens so often in digital transformation projects is that people
Something shiny. Look
right.
what he
You
can do.
become
Look what.
fascinated with the technology itself, and they go like, well, I joke about this all the time that in my years of working in different companies, I've had that phenomenon. I'm sure you have too, where, maybe your boss comes over and slaps down a newspaper clipping on your desk and goes, this is a thing about cloud. What's our cloud strategy, right? And the light said that all that like there's no cloud strategy. There's a strategy, and a cloud may be part of how we deploy that strategy, but it's not, we don't have a high level operational cloud strategy. Like that's a very silly thing to say. And so it's the same thing with automation, with AI, with agentic AI, anything you name, there is no AI strategy for most companies.
I get calls on that, very often. Hey, can you build my AI strategy? Can you build my, this? You don't. You go back to people. What are your people trying to do?
Right.
But I get questions all the time. Can you get a cybersecurity strategy? Could you give us a AI strategy or cloud strategy? All those strategies are useless. You got to take a look at your people. What are you trying to do with your people?
Yeah, yeah, and I think, and obviously we both understand what people are really asking at a kind of granular level. It's like, if you just are trying to tackle that one piece, the cybersecurity, for example, that you're trying to tackle that one piece, it's a weak link in your chain, that sort of thing, then it makes sense to say, well, we want to approach cybersecurity, we want to improve that, and we want to do it strategically. But saying what is your cybersecurity strategy is not the same as saying we want to improve cybersecurity and we want to do it strategically. The second articulation of that makes way more sense, right? Because it means you're going back to holistic organizational strategy. You're saying, what is the strategy of the company? What are we trying to do? What is it we're in business to do? What are we trying to accomplish? How do we align with customers? What is the value proposition? And then once we get all the way through sort of laddering out in a canvas model, like, the brand, the culture, the experience, the data, the technology, and so on, then we understand, I see now how cybersecurity can be layered in at each of these places or can be part of these different interaction points and can help us shore up what it is we're trying to do at that highest level, at that really most fundamental level of what security is, or sorry, strategic strategy is supposed to be about.
Yeah, if you tie it back to the business as well, I'm trying to manage some business risk and cybersecurity is causing some of the risk. That makes sense. If you simply say, listen, my people get interrupted every time they try to do important work because there's some spam and all that kind of stuff happening.
Yeah.
So I need to improve my people's experience so they stay focused on what they're trying to do. Those things make sense, but simply just going after, there's something new shining in the market that I want to. Great point. So now I want to get your take on AI. So what are your thoughts on the AI and what do you think that's changing that, there's a lot of talk about, impacting business, impacting people, changing lives. What are your thoughts on AI and what do you see some of the biggest changes from the people you've been working with?
Yeah, so I think probably like you as well, I'm no stranger to AI. We've been working around AI for many, many years, long before ChatGPT was released to the public in November 2022, and everybody started talking about AI. But AI was very much a part of the projects I was part of for 30 years. It was just various pieces of machine learning, right? Like different kinds of algorithmic optimization or different kinds of, recommenders or things like that. Those were always part of the mix of the kinds of e-commerce platforms or of, different kinds of insurance review processes or things like that. We always had those in the mix. It's just been very interesting these last, 2.5 to almost 3 years now since ChatGPT's release, how much the conversation about AI has become a conversation about large language models, right? And what that entails. And I think for good reason, because those have been truly transformative for the access many people, have individually to the concept of AI and what AI can do for you from a productivity standpoint. The idea that you can use ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity or whatever and improve your ability to access information, to develop better reports, and walk yourself through different processes where that you otherwise would have had to spend hours and hours researching over Google or whatever. It's incredible. Honestly, it's truly transformational for many people. It's as I mentioned before, I'm a language nerd, so it fascinates me from a linguistic, like a psycholinguistic perspective, that it is happening through language, because that's something that's truly innate for humans, that we understand that we can communicate through this natural language, and that's always been the promise of natural language work within AI. And so we're finally seeing it, and that's fascinating. I think with it, though, of course, we have these kind of existential concerns that arise where people fear for the rise of AGI or superintelligence, where they fear for the collected power of AI in business, and that it's going to mean the end of jobs. And I think, obviously some of those concerns are valid, but I think there's also a lot of human psychology that's getting, really, really blown out of shape and amplified because of the nature of how we're interacting with these tools. So, also I think there's a lot of very bad decisions being made by leaders when they have the opportunity to think about what large language models or AI, other kinds of AI can do in their organization. Their first thought is towards, cuts and efficiency, and and that's a real unfortunate kind of approach because, as we've seen a number of times, many kinds of organizations might make very rash kinds of changes, like a newsroom cutting all its editors and replacing them with ChatGPT, only to have to roll that decision back after they make, egg on their face types of mistakes that are really basic, that any human person who's a skilled editor would have caught before that went to print.
Yeah.
So I think we see the full range of, opportunity and threat that's happening and that stands to happen. So it's really what it feels like it's doing is kind of a both extremes kind of thing. Like it's shy. It's a microscope like focus on how it is we think about ourselves and our use of language and our consciousness, and then it's this macroscope that's saying, how is it that we see ourselves fitting into the world and the purpose of our existence, and how we view our meaningfulness of our lives if we don't have work, and how that relates to big business and government and
Wow.
geopolitics and so on. So I think it's a really, obviously, a very complicated time, but I think most people aren't equipped to sort of break it down to why they feel that sense of angst and uncertainty about AI.
Yeah. I was doing some research, I think, a couple of days ago, and I simply put Grok 4 came and ChatGPT, deep research, and I simply put give me a number of companies with this revenue by state, by can you draw a table for me, right? So it went to any document the resources, sources as well, right? It went to
Yeah,
157 web pages, gathered the data, and built a table for me in about 3.5 minutes. Now,
incredible.
humanly, it's not possible to do that. You cannot just go to 150 some pages and gather all the data, draw a table in 3 minutes. And I think so there's so many good use to that.
Sure.
But I think one of the, you probably know Simon from a leadership coach. I was watching his podcast and his take on that, and I want to get your take on that. What he was mentioning, that technology and AI is very good at telling you how to get to point A to point B, right? Or point C. So simply, so that it's, I want to achieve this goal. It will tell you, okay, this is the 10 step you need to do. Here's a plan for it. Go for it, right? So from getting from point A to point B, wherever you want to get to, whatever plan you need, it can build a plan in a second for you, and you go. But on a human side, the journey we go through and the experience we have, that's what makes us better human. That's what improves our skill set. So if you talk public speaking, so you cannot get a plan how to get to be better public speaker. You need to practice, you need to work on it. That human experience, that journey, you cannot take that away, because that's what makes us better. That's what improves our relationships. That's what improves us as a humans. And that's what's a key, and that will not go away with the AI. And that's where the skill set comes in. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're on it, and I also think that even your example of the table of businesses that Grok was able to put together for you, it's fascinating, and it's fantastic to be able to do that sort of productivity, to have that productivity in a moment's sort of execution. And I think that's also where we get a little blindsided and tend to think like, "Oh, cool, we've got this incredible, overwhelming amount of productivity, so I can do anything." But in reality, once you look at that data set, you might actually go like, "You know what? This isn't even all that useful. What I need to do is filter this by how many of them have recently had executive changes," or, something like that. And you start to learn, but that's because that's context. You're able to put it in the context of the decisions you're trying to make, the kinds of problems you're trying to solve. You have an awareness of how this problem that you're trying to solve fits in the context of the world. You have an awareness of, the larger kind of intersectionality or the interconnectedness of this problem with the other problems that you're trying to solve. Those kinds of things are going to get better. They're going to evolve with increasing sophistication in models and AI tools. But I also think that this is where we should give ourselves some credit. We should give ourselves the benefit of the doubt that we still have an awful lot to offer for a pretty long time when it comes to, being able to understand context and emotional intelligence and good judgment calls and, how to make decisions in a really sophisticated way. And that's why I talk about, this process of insights and foresights and decision making and understanding future readiness, everything that I lay out in What Matters Next. I think that those are the skills that we need in an increasingly AI driven future. Because I think what we're going to find is that, as you say, like gathering up so much data is going to be trivial. That's child's play. What we need to do is make better decisions with that data. And we need to keep ourselves at that high level of insights and strategy in order to understand how to use the awesome power at our fingertips.
Hmm. Yeah, what we bring to AI is that's a human centric. That's more important. What question you're asking, that's how you solve problem, not what the data is giving you. Very
Exactly.
interesting. So let's talk about business leaders or business owners who are watching us. You've been working with the business leader for a long time. And any setup advice you can offer. Where can they start if they want to start improving their decision making process? Or they want to work on some of these. We talk about human centric side of things, how to build a process around people. Where can they? Is the point they can start, or where can they start working on? To get better in this area.
I really think that, as I lay out a lot of different tools in What Matters Next, but I think one of the most important ones is really understanding that now next continuum, really thinking about the future in ways that feel more empowering, that feel like more like you have a sense of agency, because I think that that holds a lot of people back. From making good decisions because it feels like, well, kind of what's the point? I don't know anything about the future, so I just have to kind of let it happen and then we'll respond when it gets here. Like that's not how we need to approach it. We can approach it where, we're increasingly asking better questions. We're increasingly gathering what I talk about in the book as bankable foresights. This idea that the better we do at asking questions and gathering partial answers and synthesizing those into insights and looking at the externalities and context of our what's going on around us, and then making timely approaches, decisions that are timely approaches, but also banking foresights, the kinds of things that we go like, well, I don't need to act on this now, but I do kind of get the impression this is going to be important at some point, whether that's months from now or years from now or even decades from now. I kind of have an indication from my research, from my thinking, from talking to my stakeholders that eventually I'm going to need to pivot toward or transition toward or build a trajectory toward this kind of an outcome, this kind of a thing. And so that becomes a bankable foresight. And as we
Mhm.
collect those, the future is not so uncertain anymore. The future starts to be these kind of points of light that are actually pretty illuminating. They're actually guiding us toward, there's really a lot of clarity about some of the trends that are moving that we can see about our industry or about what people's preferences are. And obviously there's black swan events, some new entrant may completely disrupt the way that you're planning to go. And or something like COVID happens and it's a complete black swan and everybody is forced to sort of rethink their transformation approach and everything. But for the most part, what we have is the opportunity to think about transformation as catching up to whatever the current realities are, the current externalities, what the change we've already know we need to make, and innovation about looking ahead with as much clarity as we're able to muster, as much foresight as we're able to collect. And, I think that kind of approach to future readiness is really going to be transformative for so many leaders out there.
You mentioned COVID, and your book came after COVID. So,
Mhm.
a lot of companies, a lot of leaders were forced to transform their strategy digitally, or they were forced to make some decision to move
Right.
business forward simply because they had no choice. Did that change people's perspective a little bit? They didn't have a luxury of unlimited time. They had to make a decision faster. Did that change some of that stuff?
Yeah, I think it brought to light this thing I just mentioned about, the difference between transformation and innovation. Over 20 some years of being around digital transformation, we've been having this conversation for a really long time. I think most people have talked about digital transformation and innovation as if they're synonymous. But I think COVID really was a great illustration of the fact that those two things happen at different places on the now next continuum.
Yeah.
There are things there is something where a change has happened. Either it's, a virus, or it's a major change in customer expectations, or it's a new entrant into the marketplace, or, some new reality has changed. And whether that's urgent, like sudden, or it's happened over many years, you have some kind of catch up to do to get to, sort of parity with that moment, with what that moment requires of you. And that's what I think we saw was very clearly illustrated, was because of that urgent, sudden change. So many healthcare and education and retail and food service and all these different sectors had to do really, really concentrated catch up to, do bricks and clicks kinds of implementations, to do, kind of, FaceTime based doctor's appointments, all these different kinds of things, or Zoom classrooms or whatever. And all of that transformation took place very, very rapidly, as we saw. None of that was necessarily innovation, or not much of it
Good
was
point.
really
Good
innovation,
push. Yeah.
right? It was things that most you could have found examples of in some places. Like, I mean, obviously, like Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, and some pizza companies had mobile order in their apps with mobile pickup, right? But now it was important for all food service to be able to do that sort of place your order and then have a touchless pickup type of environment. So it meant that what was innovative when Starbucks did it some many years back suddenly became the norm. Everybody had to catch up. Everybody had to do it if you were going to be competitive in this current, COVID environment that we were in. Innovation means looking ahead, though. Innovation means standing in the current moment and thinking about the future. What is new? What could we truly bring that no one else is thinking about yet or has done yet? That would be aligned with what we're trying to achieve in the future. And that is where you see examples like, when I love using the Netflix example, right? When Netflix was still in the midst of an all-out bloody battle with Blockbuster for DVD rental dominance, and yet they're investing R&D into set-top boxes, which was the predecessor to streaming as we know it. And so lo and behold, not only did they win the DVD rental battle, but they were poised to roll out the streaming platform that replaced DVD rental, that became the norm, that became, now they've reinvented and re-innovated many times since. But you look at those kinds of things and they seem like magic. They seem so visionary. Like, how could someone have possibly read the tea leaves and known to put dollars into that kind of investment? And I think the answer is really in front of us. Like, we always have access to indicators in our industries, in our businesses, what's showing us that there's a very strong possibility that there's going to be customer interest in this, that, Wi-Fi speeds are increasing in the case of that streaming example, right? Like,
Yeah.
people are spending more time watching media online. That YouTube wasn't a thing yet, but online video was a thing. So, these kinds of things are out there. They're just, as Amy Webb says, she's a great futurist. She talks about the fringe, right? If you're looking at the fringe of these things, that they aren't mainstream, but they're very experimental. And if you pay attention to some of those signals as indicators of what might be happening, where there might be interest, you probably have the makings of something that could be very innovative
Hmm.
within your company.
Very interesting. Yeah, if you're paying attention to how we're consuming certain content, definitely.
Hmm.
And transformation. If you do a transformation, that may introduce some of the innovation idea and innovative ideas as well, right? We did this. Could we take it to a different level, right?
Right. Yeah, good point. Sure. I think there's a certain amount of learnings from that transformation process that could point to, well, we brought all of our healthcare records into the EHR. Like, is it possible that we could do something that's predictive, that offers some value to customers or to our patients, that helps them understand their own health better using predictive models? And maybe that's innovation. Maybe that's something that other companies aren't doing. I think there's a lot of that kind of opportunity, to your point, a really good insight.
Yeah, you stack some more creative ideas on top of the transformation. Very interesting. Listen, I enjoy this discussion so much. We could talk for hours, but I know we should have lived the time. But we could talk for hours. But really enjoyed it and learned so much from you, Akid. Um, where can people find you for your book, or how can they connect with you?
My website is koinsights.com, and there's links there, on my About Kate page to all my social platforms. You can also find all my books there, my speaking, all that good stuff. So that's pretty much the best place to start. And I look forward to hearing from people. I hope people will send a note and say what they learned or what questions they have, and what they learned from reading What Matters Next.
Definitely. I'm going to include all those links below this
Great.
video, Kit. And I learned so much. I'm sure the business people are watching or listening to us on a podcast, they're going to learn so much as well. I will strongly encourage people to, and there's going to be your contact information below the video. Click a link, connect with you, and have a conversation. Who knows where the conversation goes, but click. So where's the focus? Kit, a lot of time and energy going a lot of on the speaking engagements or training side of things, or on a book. So where are you spending a lot of time?
Yeah, I think it's just application. It's really trying to help people apply these concepts and look at how it plays out in different industries. Breaking that down. For a lot of the work I've been doing is with healthcare. A lot of it is, in cities. And so it's what I learned about my work over the last few years is that, not only is it about technology and humanity, but it's also about varying levels of scale. It's about the fact that I'm interested in how people individually are affected by the kind of technology driven experiences that they have, but also society as a whole. So you can kind of go all the way out to the most macro kind of understanding of scale and all the way down to the most micro level of scale. And all of our solutions and all of our discussions about, how to implement these things should have relevance at every one of those levels. So it's really fun to work with something like, cities or big hospital corporations or whatever, where there's a huge amount of scale, but you can still think about individual experiences in really, really tangible ways.
I love this. If these are complex problems that, whether decision or technology or human side of things, these are complex, and you helping on people to solve these complex problems, this is a great help. And I never seen anybody looked at these problems through the lenses you looked at it from a
Oh,
human side of
thanks,
things.
Gurmeet.
Um, so I think this is a great help for business leaders. Any business leader watching, have a chat with you. Definitely, the way you approach things is a huge help because these, for have a technology understanding. For us, may not be that big a deal, but if somebody who's on a CEO level or president level in the large corporations, for them, this is a huge help because you're simplifying decision process for them and it's simply helping them solve very, very complex problems.
Well, thank you, Gurmeet. I appreciate you, saying it that way and summarizing it that way. It is meaningful to me. I think there's, every decision that a leader needs to make ultimately is not only keeping that leader from being able to sleep well at night, but is impacting so many people, both, as employees and the customers of that experience. So I love the idea that, helping somebody make a decision that helps them sleep better also impacts all these other people downstream, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I want to acknowledge your time. Thank you so much for time. I learned so much from you, and we can go on and talk for hours, but it was very interesting discussion. I enjoyed it.
Thank you,
Thank you so much for time, kid.
Thank you, Gurmeet.